My name is Jack Alpert. I'm an engineer and a cognitive scientist. I'm going to take you on a little journey to discover how we underestimate the human predicament and overestimate our abilities to muddle through. If my story leaves you with unanswered questions, send me email. The address is on the front page of this website. The elephant problem, or in other words, the overpopulation problem, will not be solved until nonlinearity plays its role. Because most people don't understand nonlinearity, let me begin with a little analogy that maps our journey. Kids have few antibodies, they catch every virus. They get vaccinated to help them fight off the worst of these viruses. What if there was a population virus? If you caught it, you believe having many children is wonderful, and this leads to overpopulation. Paul Ehrlich invests every day in finding ways to combat overpopulation. His work, in effect, creates a ZPG vaccine. And when his vaccine works, when his ideas are transmitted, a person thinks 2 children is just fine. Everyone's not yet vaccinated, and lots of people are working on rectifying that. However, even if everyone received a ZPG vaccine and everyone wanted only 2 children, it would not make the future we want. David and Marcy Pimentel tell us that 60% of our 6.7 billion people don't have enough to eat, and ZPG won't change that. Most do not have good health care. Heck, a big chunk of them live in the developed world, and ZPG won't change that either. Most civil institutions maintain social stability by the thinnest of margins, and ZPG won't fix that. The ZPG ID, the ZPG vaccine, does not give complete immunity from the injuries caused by the population virus. When you finish viewing these videos, I want you to be able to marshal more powerful ideas than what Paul put in his vaccine. What new ideas go into this vaccine? Where did I look for these more powerful ideas? As an engineer, I like to know how things work. And as a cognitive scientist, I want to know how people perceive these workings. What I found in my research is that normal thinking lacks an understanding of how things work. And even when we know how mechanisms work in theory, we don't recognize their occurrence in the physical world. One of these unseen and misunderstood mechanisms is nonlinearity. Thus, the title, The Nonlinearity of the Elephant Problem. This talk has 2 parts: understanding nonlinearity and applying this understanding to the elephant problem. Before starting the first part, the tutorial on nonlinearity, let me give you the physical world context that is relevant. There are 1 billion people going to bed hungry tonight. A little change in climate, a little lowering of the water table, a little rise in the price of fuel, a little degradation in soil quality, and that billion will starve to death. Also, everyone on the plate is intentionally or unintentionally pushing others off. This makes for social conflict. Most of these conditions go unnoticed. Instead, our fellow humans see what the guys in the boat see: global warming. The cause of it remains mostly out of sight. And they see peak oil, or soil degradation, or species extinction, or water shortage. However, social conflict might be the biggest problem, and it remains mostly out of sight. Social conflict is hard to see because of a cognitive defect. You guessed it. That cognitive defect is not seeing or appreciating nonlinearity. The absence of nonlinearity helps us underestimate our problem and overestimate our ability to muddle through. Nonlinearity is part of our system, yet we behave as if it is not. I guess it's time to explain nonlinearity. Let me start by having you consider your behavior in an auto crash. It's a crash that happened for 70 years before cars had seatbelts and before kids were relegated to the back seat. Visualize yourself driving down the road at 31 miles an hour. Your unbelted child sits on the seat beside you. A large truck blocks the road. What do? Of course, you slam on the brakes, and you put your arm out to keep that child from flying into the dashboard. Or you keep your arm down. I know this sounds like a no-brainer. Most people put their arms out. However, people during this period who put their arms out increased the injuries of 1 million children, and they killed 100,000. That is, 100,000 children would not have died if their parents kept their arms down. If this car crash problem was so easy to understand, all the people who raised their arms over that 70-year period would not have done it. Let me see if I can explain what happened to derail their thought processes. The dynamics are complicated. So as a warm-up, consider this simpler problem. You are standing on a third-floor balcony. Behind you in the apartment is a raging fire. You have to jump. Below is a concrete parking lot. I picked a third-floor balcony because after falling 3 floors, your speed will be 30 miles an hour. Someone puts out a 1-inch thick foam pad to cushion your fall, and then another kid runs over and puts out a 12-inch foam pad. On which pad do you want to land? Everyone picks the 12-inch pad. Now, let me describe the auto crash problem in a way that will allow you to see how the 12-inch and 1-inch stopping distance fits into the decision to put your arm out. When a car crashes into a big truck, the front end crushes 12 inches. Everything behind the wrinkled part of the car stops in 12 inches. For example, the rear bumper stops in 12 inches, the seat stops in 12 inches, and the dashboard stops in 12 inches. And if you're seat belted, you stop in 12 inches. The belt loads are 20 times your body weight, or about 3,000 pounds. That steak you had for dinner feels like a bowling ball in your stomach. But because the duration of forces is short, they cause no serious injury. People walk away with only bruises. Let me give you another example of crashing with no serious injury. If you happen to be leaning down to pick up something on the floor, that is, your head and knees are up against the dashboard, when the car hits the truck, you stop at 12 inches. The forces on you are the same magnitude as if you were wearing a seatbelt, and you walk away from the accident with minor bruises. Now you know that 12-inch stopping distances produce low forces and low injuries. Next, I will show why not holding back a child results in 12-inch stopping distances, and holding back a child results in a 1-inch stopping distance. There are 2 parts to slowing down a car in this accident. The first is the slowing down during braking, which amounts to about 1 mile an hour, and the second, which is slowing down after you hit the truck, which in this case is 30 miles per hour. Holding back a 40-pound child during braking requires about a 20-pound force, a force most people can create. However, when the car hits the truck, it slows down 40 times faster than full braking. The force required to hold the child back is 40 times bigger, or 800 pounds, and no one can keep the child on the seat during a crash. Assume you did hold the child back during braking. Then, the child would be on the seat in this position when the car hits the truck. Because you can't hold the child back anymore, the child would continue forward at 30 miles per hour. The dash panel rapidly slows down. After 6 of the 12 inches of car crush was complete, the yellow parts of the car would be slowed down to 15 miles an hour. The child is still going 30 miles an hour. After the car is crushed a full 12 inches, the yellow parts of the car are now stopped, and the child's head, still going 30 miles an hour, slams into a standing still dash panel. The head makes a 1-inch dent in the panel. The child's head has to slow down from 30 miles an hour to 0 in 1 inch, and this usually causes death. Same as jumping off the balcony under the 1-inch thick foam pad. Now let's look at what happens when you don't put your arm out and don't hold the child back during braking. Assume this car is traveling 31 miles per hour as before. You slam on the brakes before the car reaches the truck, and the car, all the yellow, slows down from 31 miles an hour to 30. Because your arm is down, the child keeps going at 31 miles an hour. That is, the child is moving toward the dash panel at 1 mile an hour. Now, before the car gets to the truck, the child catches up with the dash, and there is a 1 mile per hour collision. The child gets a bruise from banging into the dashboard at 1 mile an hour. However, now the child and the dash are both going 30 miles per hour, and they proceed forward together until they collectively crash into the truck. But you already know what happens here. Both the child and car come to a rest in 12 inches. The same 12 inches as wearing a seatbelt. Child walks away, bruised, shaken, but not seriously injured. I did not drag you through this complex proof to teach you to keep your arms down to protect your child. That would have been a waste of time. Seatbelts protect your child. I did it to get you to think about how you gather, process, and value information. That on the balcony you did these 3 tasks confidently and got a good result. In the car you did them equally confidently and got a bad result. In this next section, I want to explain why. If I do this well, you will understand a weakness in normal thought processes I call nonlinearity. To facilitate this understanding, I will use the relationship between stopping distance and stopping force. People correctly understand part of this relationship as demonstrated by the behavior chosen in the balcony problem. However, part of this relationship remains hidden as demonstrated by the putting your arm out behavior. Let's take a closer look at how these 2 variables that make up an important portion of our daily lives are related. Think of a car. It has a coffee cup on the dashboard and it's traveling 30 miles per hour. If you take your foot off the gas, the car goes 400 feet to a stop, and the force on the coffee cup is so small it does not move or spill. If we had to give that force a number, it would be 5/100ths of a g. If we brake the car to a normal stop, the stopping distance is 200 feet, and the force on the cup is still quite low. The coffee cup still does not spill. To give this stopping force a number, consider 10/100ths of a g. If we slam on the brakes, the car comes to a halt in 40 feet, and the coffee cup spills. The force on the cup is 50/100ths of a g. Now look at the 3 stopping distances and the 3 stopping forces. As the stopping distance shortens, the stopping force increases. That's why when we jumped off the balcony, we all picked the thicker pad. More stopping distance means smaller forces. However, there is a hidden part of the relationship that is not so obvious. Notice that when the stopping distance was shortened 200 feet, the stopping force doubled. Therefore, when the stopping distance was shortened a lesser amount, 160 feet, we might predict that the increase in stopping force would be less than 2x. However, this prediction would have been incorrect. The actual stopping force increased 5 times. When we realize that the linear relationship we expected to exist between stopping force and stopping distance does not exist, we begin to understand the meaning of the nonlinear relationship that does. We begin to understand why we have been making some incorrect predictions and choosing some less than perfect behaviors. To more fully understand what nonlinearity means, let's make a table of the information we have thus far created. I will list the stopping distances that we have visited in the last 10 slides here, and their related stopping forces here. Remember that each entry in the table is for an object stopping from a speed of 30 miles per hour. For example, coasting to a stop, stopping distance 400 feet, stopping force 5/100ths of a g. Normal braking, stopping distance 200 feet, stopping force 10/100ths of a g. Emergency braking, stopping distance 40 feet, stopping force 50/100ths of a g. Sport car braking, we have not discussed this example, but inserting it now will help our understanding. It has a stopping distance of 20 feet and a stopping force of 1 g. Crashing with seatbelts, stopping distance 1 foot, stopping force 20 g's, and crashing without seatbelts into the dashboard, stopping distance, let's call it 1/10 of a foot instead of an inch, and stopping force 200 g's. Next, I want to plot the numbers on a graph. Stopping distance on the horizontal axis, stopping force in g's on the vertical axis. The coasting to a stop lies at 400 feet. That's off this page to the right and very close to the 0 line. Normal braking here, emergency braking here, sport car braking at this point, crashing with seatbelts here, and crashing without seatbelts here. Plotting the table's points reveals some relationships between stopping distance and stopping force. Most obvious is that most of the points lie along 2 straight lines. One near horizontal with low forces that raise slowly, and one near vertical with high forces that raise rapidly. However, something can be learned about weaknesses in thought processes when we realize that the points along the x-axis, those from the blue highlighted area, are part of most drivers' braking experience. When we use this experience to predict the forces related to the shorter but not experienced stopping distances, we expect those forces will increase but will remain near the x-axis. For example, we correctly predict by linear extrapolation slightly higher stopping forces for the sports car with better brakes. And we correctly believe the coffee cup will tip faster and splash more. However, our experience in the blue part of the curve do not predict the abrupt increases in stopping force which we have plotted. Why should it? In the range of our experience, the yellow area in the table, we have shortened the stopping distance almost 400 feet and the stopping force has increased less than 1 g. Why should we believe that a few more feet of shortening will radically increase the stopping force? Nothing in the blue section will tell us that shortening the stopping distance into the red section would increase the stopping force 200 times. So now we know why people put their arms out to hold their children back. They were not worried about making a short stopping distance for their child. Short stopping distances have no significant meaning. Why should they be discovered and avoided? Parents have no motivation to check to see if putting an arm out, besides preventing a bump into the dashboard, somehow creates a short stopping distance and great injury. With the help of this guided tour, we have discovered the nonlinearity between stopping distance and stopping force. Could a person have made this discovery on their own without this tour? Next, we will discover a way to obtain this understanding just from the data in the blue part of the curve. Just the part we can measure from our experience. Is there a simple relationship that connects each of these stopping distances to each of these stopping forces? Here is an equation we can try. The number 20 divided by stopping distance, 20 feet, gives a correct stopping force of 1g. The number 20 divided by a stopping distance of 40 feet correctly produces 0.5 g's stopping force. A person using this equation can predict the stopping forces for any stopping distance. Direct experience is no longer required. For example, jumping off a third-floor balcony into a swimming pool that stops our fall after we penetrate the water 5 feet. The point will fall inside the circle. Let me expand the circle so you can see more clearly. The water stops our fall after we penetrate 5 feet. The stopping force is 20 divided by 5, or 4 g's. 4g stopping force, 5 feet stopping distance, places a calculated point in the graph that appears to be along a bent but smooth curve. It appears this equation could give correct forces for any stopping distance. I don't have to experience them to know them, and I don't have to be coached to know them, but I do have to gather, process, and value information differently than I normally do. Thinking without nonlinearity can be described as the non-recognition of three things. 1, our immersion in a nonlinear system. 2, extrapolation limits of our experience. And 3, not being able to predict our behavior's effects on a system. When a person jumped off the balcony into the thicker pad, he or she was using linear extrapolation of his or her experience. It was just luck that the thick pad was thick enough. If the choice had been between a 1-inch pad and a 2-inch pad, the person would have picked the 2-inch pad, and the resulting much higher forces would have killed him or her. The deadly meaning of a willingness to extrapolate linearly from direct experience in systems that are nonlinear becomes fully apparent when we realize how it helped individuals put their arm out to protect their child in a crash. Let me repeat this argument graphically. Some dynamic systems are described by a smooth line with a sharp bend. For most of the horizontal axis, the line rises slowly. And then for small values of x, the curve rises steeply. We define this kind of system as nonlinear. Our less than optimal behaviors are based on linear extrapolations of our experience, the blue everyday operating portion of the system, which does not predict the unpleasant events in the red portion where we have no experience. Since all the points in the line are predicted by a single equation, and that equation can be derived from information in the blue portion, that is our everyday experience, we have a process that can predict the y values of the curve in the yellow region where we have no experience. It is the motivation and capacity to abstract, that is, to build the equation, that allows us to pick appropriate behaviors for events we have never experienced. Let me describe some guidelines to help overcome these limitations. I call these guidelines abstracting nonlinearity. Consider 3 steps. The first step, if I participate in an environment like driving a car, I have to check to see if the car, road, passenger system contains nonlinear relationships. For example, I have to look for and discover the surprising relationship between stopping force and stopping distance. It may be hidden from my simple experience, but not from a how things work analysis. The second step, when I do find nonlinear relationships lurking within my system, I then know to distrust linear extrapolation of my experience for guidance in selecting behavior. Step 3, when I need to know how two variables relate in regions I have not experienced, I have to use a how things work analysis. This is extremely important for nonlinear relationships because my experience linearly extrapolates to this straight line and not to these points that describe the real system. You've now completed most of the hard work in this seminar. You understand the concepts describing nonlinearity, and you know what happens when this understanding is missing from the analysis. You deserve congratulations. To learn nonlinearity's role in understanding the human predicament, you should now click on Part 2.